This is Dr.RED Panda.
People think tickle torture is harmless. But in history, it broke people faster than pain. Because once it started, you couldn't really make it stop. Screaming didn't help. Everyone thought you were laughing. And that's the disturbing part. I'm Dr. Red Panda, and this story is stranger than it sounds. Today, we're diving into one of the most uncomfortable punishments in history. Why tickle torture was so hard to endure. Tickle torture sounds harmless, almost ridiculous, until you understand what it actually does to the human body. Tickling doesn't just make you laugh. It hijacks your nervous system. When someone is tickled against their will, the brain loses control over breathing, muscle tension, and even vocal reactions. You're not laughing because you're happy. You're laughing because your body has been forced into it. That loss of control is the key. Unlike pain, which the mind can sometimes endure through focus or resistance, tickling offers no such escape. You can grit your teeth through pain. You can stay silent. But with tickle torture, silence is impossible. Your body betrays you in front of everyone. Historical records describe victims begging for it to stop. Not through screams, but through uncontrollable laughter. And that's what made it so effective. To anyone watching, it didn't look like suffering. It looked like entertainment. In several early accounts from Europe, tickle torture was used not in dark dungeons, but in semi-public spaces. The goal wasn't to injure the body, it was to humiliate the person. Being restrained, surrounded, and forced to laugh stripped away dignity far more efficiently than a whip ever could. There's also a physical danger most people don't realize. Prolonged tickling can lead to hyperventilation, muscle spasms, and extreme exhaustion. Victims would sometimes collapse, not from pain, but from lack of air and complete loss of bodily control. And because laughter is usually associated with joy, bystanders often underestimated how dangerous the situation really was. What made this punishment especially cruel was its psychological effect afterward. Survivors often reported intense shame. They weren't remembered as someone who endured pain bravely, but as someone who laughed uncontrollably while being punished. In societies obsessed with honor and self-control, that reputation could follow a person for life. This is why tickle torture wasn't considered mild at the time. It attacked something deeper than flesh. It attacked composure, identity, the ability to present yourself as strong, rational, and dignified. And perhaps the most unsettling part is this. The victim's own body became the instrument of punishment. No blood, no scars, just a memory of losing control in front of others and knowing you couldn't stop it. That's why, in many cases, tickle torture broke people faster than pain ever could. Why it worked better than pain. To understand why tickle torture was considered more effective than pain, you have to look beyond the body and into the social mind. Pain is private even when it's public. A person being beaten can still choose how they respond. They can stay silent. They can glare back. They can turn suffering into defiance. Across history, pain has often been linked to courage. Enduring it without breaking could even raise someone's status. Tickle torture destroyed that option. When someone is tickled against their will, their reaction is uncontrollable. Laughter bursts out automatically, no matter how terrified or angry they feel inside. The body sends a signal that contradicts the reality of the situation. To observers, it looks like joy. To the victim, it feels like betrayal. That contradiction is what made tickle torture so powerful. In many historical punishments, witnesses mattered. Justice wasn't just about correcting behavior, it was about sending a message. With pain-based punishments, the crowd saw suffering. With tickle torture, the crowd saw laughter. And laughter changes everything. People laugh back. They relax. They feel entertained. The punishment becomes a spectacle rather than a solemn act. The victim is no longer seen as someone being wronged, but as someone being laughed at. This created a devastating social shift. Instead of sympathy, the punished person received mockery. Instead of fear, the crowd felt amusement. And once a crowd laughs, the victim loses all moral ground. Any attempt to protest only makes it worse. Restraints amplified this effect. Victims were often bound or held down, unable to shield themselves or escape. Every movement became useless. Every gasp sounded like another laugh. Even begging could be mistaken for enjoyment. In societies where honor, masculinity, and self-control were central values, this kind of exposure was catastrophic. A man who cried out in pain could still be respected. A man who laughed helplessly in public could be permanently diminished. Historical anecdotes describe individuals who endured physical punishment but broke down emotionally under tickle torture. Not because it hurt more, but because it erased their ability to perform strength. Their body performed weakness for them. There was also an element of unpredictability. Pain follows a pattern. Tickling does not. The nervous system becomes overstimulated, disoriented, and exhausted. Victims never knew when it would stop. That uncertainty intensified fear and helplessness. Perhaps most disturbing is how responsibility seemed to disappear. Because no blood was drawn and no wounds were visible, punishers could convince themselves they were being merciful. The crowd could convince itself it was harmless fun. And yet, the psychological damage could linger far longer than bruises. Tickle torture worked not because it caused pain, but because it turned suffering into something that looked ridiculous. It stripped victims of dignity, control, and social standing, all while pretending to be harmless. And in a world where reputation mattered as much as survival, that was often worse than pain itself. Why tickle torture eventually disappeared. Despite how effective tickle torture was, it didn't last forever. And the reason it disappeared wasn't mercy, it was risk. Unlike pain-based punishments, tickle torture was extremely hard to control. Pain has limits that are visible. Blood, wounds, screams. These are clear signals that something has gone too far. But forced laughter hides danger. From the outside, everything looks fine right up until it isn't. Historical accounts suggest that prolonged tickling could cause serious physical distress. Victims experienced extreme exhaustion, breathing difficulties, muscle spasms, and in rare cases, collapse. Because laughter masks distress, those administering the punishment often failed to recognize when a person was close to losing consciousness. This unpredictability made tickle torture dangerous, not just to the victim but to the authority enforcing it. If someone died or suffered lasting harm during a punishment that was supposed to be harmless, responsibility became impossible to deny. There were no wounds to justify the outcome, no visible injuries to explain away the damage. What was meant to look mild suddenly looked negligent or cruel. As legal systems evolved, this became a serious problem. By the early modern period, courts began to favor punishments that were clearly defined, measurable, and legally defensible. Tickle torture didn't fit that framework. There was no clear line between discipline and abuse. No way to standardize duration or intensity. What broke one person might barely affect another. Public opinion also began to shift. As societies moved away from spectacle-based justice, crowds became less tolerant of punishments that resembled entertainment. What once felt amusing started to feel unsettling. Watching someone lose control of their body for the crowd's amusement raised uncomfortable questions about cruelty, consent, and responsibility. Medical voices joined the criticism. Early physicians and moral writers warned that forcing laughter could damage the body and mind. They argued that punishment should correct behavior, not destroy composure or sanity. While these warnings didn't end such practices overnight, they contributed to growing skepticism. There was also a deeper issue. Tickle torture exposed something authorities didn't want to admit, that power often relied on humiliation rather than justice. As legal systems tried to present themselves as rational and civilized, punishments rooted in mockery and loss of dignity became harder to justify. Eventually, tickle torture faded from official use. Not because people suddenly became kinder, but because it was too unstable, too revealing, and too difficult to control. Yet the idea never fully disappeared. Today, tickle torture survives in pop culture, niche communities, and uncomfortable conversations about control and consent. It keeps resurfacing because it touches something deeply human, the fear of losing control while others watch and laugh. Tickle torture reminds us that punishment doesn't have to hurt the body to break a person. Sometimes turning the body against itself is enough. And that raises an unsettling question. If a punishment leaves no scars, no blood, and no visible injuries, but destroys dignity and self-control, is it really more humane? Some people would say yes. Others would say it's even worse. So let me ask you this. Which do you think is harder to endure? Physical pain or being laughed at while you can't stop it? And here's another one, especially for the ladies watching. Would you ever consider something like this as a test of control or loyalty? Or does the idea cross a line immediately? There's no right answer, but how you react to it probably says more than you expect. I'm curious what you think. And that's a wrap for this episode of the video. I'm DR.RED Panda. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to subscribe and give it a thumbs up. Until next time, take care.